All expectations were that the main event for UFC 265 would see Francis Ngannou face Derrick Lewis for the heavyweight title. Derrick Lewis is fighting for a heavyweight belt, but it's an interim against Ciryl Gane. And it's safe to say, John, that a lot of people were not happy when this was announced.
Well, I think the people who, were upset about that need to look at dollars and cents and the history of Amanda Nunes headlining cards before, making too many criticisms. I think it is a bit disrespectful to Francis Ngannou to make an interim belt so soon after he won his belt. And it does seem like he got kind of strong armed by the UFC and Dana White and Hunter Campbell, all the executives at the UFC who just bully the fighters and their management into taking the fights that they want. But in terms of the fight itself, Lewis versus Gane, I'm really excited. Gane is already like a minus 300 favorite, so it seems like the public is pretty confident in Ciryl Gane, but I don't think it's going to be that easy of a walk in the park. Derrick Lewis is a tough guy, extremely tough, and he's got great power. But I do see, Gane kind of doing his thing there. It'll still be a good fight. There's a great pay-per-view, Luque versus Chiesa, Aldo versus Munoz. That's a great card, and we might be back breaking down that card next month.
I certainly hope so. One of the things that sort of stands out for me, it's something that I've always sort of thought about to an extent, but I think what happened with Lewis versus Gane has made that very evident. Every company, whether that's the UFC, Bellator, One Championship, etc., they always have an eye out for who they want to fight in certain events. It just makes sense from a money perspective. So if they've got an event in Madison Square Garden, you're going to want Conor, John Jones, that sort of fighter to headline. What I've noticed since Endeavour took over is they are a lot more bullish about making sure they get the fights they want. So we've seen more interim belts created. We've seen champions getting stripped more frequently. And this is another example of it. All indications are, you mentioned a couple of the reasons there. It's possibly a power play against Francis, who may be asking for too much money, wants the John Jones fight. Obviously, they know that Nunes isn't a good draw, so they don't want that headlining. But the biggest factor is it's taking place in Houston. And Derrick Lewis is a god in that region. So I could possibly see them saying, hey, if you want this event in Houston, we want Derrick Lewis fighting for a title. And if Francis isn't going to play ball, he wants to push back a month, then just for the sake of keeping up a contract, we're going to need to put an interim in place.
Yeah, I think the biggest factor is they didn't want Nunes headlining, in my opinion. I do think there is a slight added element of Lewis being a Houston guy, but it's not like Derek Lewis is going to sell any pay-per-views. I mean, he might sell a few extra hundred tickets or something like that, but it's not going to be like a life-changing draw for the event. So I do think it takes the event up another notch or two, but I think pay-per-view wise, it's still not going to do very good. I mean, like 250,000 at most buys is my guess for this one.
I'm looking at about 160, 170, but regardless of what figure that is, the alternative would have been, 80,000, 90,000 for Nunez versus Pena,
Less.
because there's just no buzz around that fight at all, which is no disrespect to
Yeah.
either girl. Where do you stand when it comes to interim belts? Because I think that's another thing that's really irked people, and more, not so much the interim belt, but the double standards around when the UFC implement them. And that's something which I've sort of been a bit annoyed by because, like, look at, say, 2017, 2018, etc. We allowed Conor McGregor to stay lightweight champion when he was off boxing Floyd Mayweather. Nunes can get away with not defending the bantamweight belt for 2 years. But Francis Ngannou wins the heavyweight title, and 3 months later, the UFC decide an interim belt's needed. Even though Francis says, hey, push the fight back a month, I'd be ready for that. That's the sort of thing that sort of, it annoys me, and I think it annoys a lot of fans. It's the double standards.
Yeah, and you saw Ariel Helwani tweet about this, saying that that was kind of the prerogative of Hunter Campbell since he took over. And you said something earlier is that WME wants to make the fights that they want to, and that's not a bad thing, inherently. But WME doesn't know what they're doing. They don't know MMA. They know numbers and dollars and cents, and they're trying to make all these financial decisions, but they're really kind of ruining the sanctity of the sport of MMA. And I do think it is disrespectful for Francis. I mean, he did win the belt like 4 months ago, and they're already giving him an interim belt. But I just think it's as simple as they didn't want Amanda Nunes headlining. They needed a way to get these heavyweights above them. And if creating some fake interim title is the way to do it, then that's the way they're doing it. But you saw Brett Okamoto, the UFC poster boy, tweet out that this doesn't change that Ngannou is not the undisputed champion. And then everyone was like, no, no, it does. It makes it disputed. I mean, if there's an interim champion, you're not the undisputed anymore. So it is a bit of a slap in the face to Ngannou, but I think he's probably going to beat whoever wins the fight, regardless. So
Do you consider an interim champion a real champion? Do you put like Carlos Condit and Shane Carwin at the same sort of level as, say, like John Jones or Ngannou or people like that?
nope. A great example of that is Tony Ferguson won an interim belt, and you know he was never undisputed UFC championship material. And I'm sure there's lots of examples like that. Interim belts. The only time it's legitimate is if you get promoted to undisputed champion, like
Whitaker.
Robert Whitaker did, and I think even Jose Aldo did back in 2015. I think, right after
Uh,
he beat Frankie Edgar, and then they made him the official champion after Conor fought Alvarez, and then he lost the undisputed belt to Holloway.